If you do actually decide to bring a corporate development leader into your SaaS company, very rarely are they more than one. That's a lot of responsibility for one person to take on. You don't want to give that responsibility to someone who doesn't have sufficient experience to do it. Welcome back to the Inorganic podcast. My name's Christian Hassold. I'm your host. And in this episode 13, we're going to talk all about the corporate development function and what good looks like inside of a SaaS company. This is going to be a pretty content-rich episode. For those of you who are listening only on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you may be, there's some content that's running on the video version on YouTube. I'll encourage you to watch that there, but if you just want to listen along, I'll do my best to talk you through the content that's on screen. And this deck that I'm sharing will also be available at inorganicpodcast.co, where I host all of my podcast episodes. So let's get into it. Let's, for example, just talk about the problem statement. If you're a founder or CEO of a SaaS company and you're contemplating doing inorganic and you're trying to decide who's the right person to get in the building to do the job, this episode is for you. What we're going to do is a bit of a deep dive on how the corporate development function inside of a SaaS company is different than other large companies. What is the right roles and responsibilities? What are the expectations you should have of the role? Common mistakes to avoid. We're going to just go through kind of the whole thing. And so this episode is really kind of a deep dive on how do you really make sure that the person you're bringing into the role, the person that you believe you are hiring, is going to help you drive results for your company in terms of inorganic. So the first place we're going to start is a little bit of the why. One, why would a scaling SaaS company want to do inorganic? What are the reasons why it's harder to build the corporate development function inside a SaaS company? And what does that blue ocean look like anyway? So we'll just start with sort of the first why, which is if you're a SaaS company and you're growing fast, eventually what's going to happen is you're going to find that either your TAM or your SAM is very concentrated. So for example, I operate in the commerce landscape, and a lot of the companies that I've worked for in the past either sell to CPG or FMCG manufacturers like Clorox or Coca-Cola. They might sell to apparel brands like Tommy Hilfiger or Gucci, or they might sell to consumer electronics distributors like Sony or Kenwood or something like that. So these TAMs, when you think about their sheer market size and number, it can be very large. But then when you get into the constituent within the SAM that actually has the pain and the need that fits with your product capability, that SAM can get very narrow. And what that means is the number of customers you can land new logo get limited. And then there's a lot of pressure to expand those customers. But even when you're expanding those customers, do you have all the capabilities you need in-house to expand the share of wallet? So there's three reasons why a SaaS company is going to want to do inorganic. One, it's going to be to expand or deepen their product portfolio. Two, to expand through geographies, whether it's in LATAM or whether it's expanding into Europe, or if you're in Europe, expanding into the US. And then three, might be gaining subject matter expertise that you don't have so you can go faster. I mean, let's say you're a company that has a lot of really great capability solving, a fairly tactical problem that can be supercharged by AI, but you don't have AI talent in your building. You might need to go acquire that talent. It's less so the case that talent is an acquisition case for a SaaS company, but it's a possibility. So let's say all of those things exist. On the other side, you've got a lot of blue ocean. There's literally thousands upon thousands of SaaS companies that get to 5, 6, 10 million in ARR, and for one reason or another can't raise money, they can't grow. There's some sort of an impediment, but those companies turn out to be a great unlocking mechanism for expanding or deepening product or expanding internationally. And so there's a ton of those companies. They're out there and available. And just the math is very simple, that the number of companies that are scaled past 50, 75, 100 million is a much smaller group than those that are under, between 5 and 10 million in ARR. So there's a pretty big pool. And if you're a scaling SaaS company, founder, CEO, management team, the one thing is that your valuation is dependent on you maintaining growth rate. So doing M&A, if you believe that's the right strategy for growing the business, is a great path. Well, what's hard about it? Let's talk first of all about maybe the difference. Before we get into that, we have to kind of talk about the difference between the M&A function inside of a large corporation like HP, Cisco, or Facebook, or Meta or Google, versus what that function would look like inside of a SaaS company. So inside of one of those large companies, the corporate development function may have anywhere between 10 or 20 people on the team who are spread across what I would say are sort of four distinct functions. The first is some sort of an executive leadership, so an SVP of corporate development, who works very closely with the CEO and the leadership team of the company and the board to define the strategy, to socialize the strategy to market, and then actually put the pieces in place to make the strategy happen. And usually the people who help support that strategy are across a deal team, a finance operations team, and a post-merger integration function. And so literally there's 10 or 15 people doing all of these things. And you can kind of see here the deal team is actually doing the deal negotiations. They're scouting the companies. They're kind of figuring out what the opportunities are. And then finance is actually doing a lot of the modeling, figuring out what is it worth to the company, how would they pay for it, what does the future look like, bringing in this capability. The finance function, or frequently an adjacent part of that team, between the deal team and finance, also manages some of the outsourced consultants like a Deloitte or an Ernst & Young who you might bring in to help evaluate the target. So there's other things that these teams are doing that may be internal or external. And then, of course, you have a post-merger integration function, which can have a number of different lanes. One can just be a project management function. They literally just project manage. Another can be people who think about people design and the first day and how you really provide a great experience for those new hires. And then another function might be more thinking about geography, physical plant, and sort of how you might carry the business forward. There's like all sorts of ways that you can letter and divide it. The point is that these corporations have large revenues and therefore large budgets and can afford these expanse teams. As we all know, a SaaS company cannot. If they get permission to do inorganic, they're definitely not going to be able to hire a team. They have to hire one, maybe two people at the most. And so the reason why this can be a bit of a challenge for a SaaS company to get to do without hiring and bringing someone in, this is sort of helping support the case for why you want to bring someone with experience from the outside, is number one, most SaaS companies that are VC backed have people in the companies who are very good at building organic. Their backgrounds, usually the founders, these are their first or second company. They've built a company and built a company from scratch and sold it before, or maybe this is their first company, but they're really sort of oriented towards organic. The second thing is their leadership team and even their product team are by and large probably really organic builders. They haven't been around a lot of inorganic. And more broadly, if you look around the whole company, whether it's the acquiring or the acquired, most of the employees tend to be sort of earlier in their career, and therefore they don't have a lot of exposure to acquisitions. They can be both exciting and sort of terrifying at the same time. And so you want to be thinking about how do you make sure that you communicate correctly the strategy and what you're doing and what their future looks like when M&A is going on around them. But perhaps the biggest challenge is if you do actually decide to bring a corporate development leader into your SaaS company, they are going to be a team of one. Very rarely are they more than one, if not two people in total, compared to the 15 we talked about in the large enterprise example. That's a lot of responsibility for one person to take on. And you don't want to give that responsibility to someone who doesn't have sufficient experience to do it. So, what are kind of the key jobs to be done, and what are sort of some of the common challenges and causes of those challenges? And what I thought I'd do here is actually just double click on the job and then the things that can go wrong if you don't hire right. The first thing you should expect from a corporate development leader is a strategy. We'll get there. But very tactically speaking, let's say a strategy is solved. It rarely is, but let's say it's solved. The first thing you need this person to do is to source, qualify, and drive deal flow. Deal flow needs to be sourced from a combination of inbound, from a combination of deep subject matter expert type relationships, like they have to know the industry, they have to know the CEOs and the investors and have all of those relationships so they can know what companies might be for sale, companies might be considering sale at some point in time, and have banking relationships in the market where they not only know who the bankers are, but also have enough rapport and relationship with them to be able to get really good read on what might be coming to market. So you're first, if not one of the first parties to the table. And, as one of my investors puts it, no transaction goes through the ecosystem without you having known about it and having an opportunity to take a look and pass it up. That's a pretty big responsibility to have on one person. And it's kind of equivalent to being an enterprise sales rep. There's just a lot of coverage you have to have in terms of relationships and multi-threading, and not just using the relationships of the company and using your own relationships, but using the relationships of your investor firm. So if you're reactive or you don't have like that deal flow, it's probably because you don't have someone really owning the sourcing responsibility, the relationships, or the market knowledge. The next thing that you should expect of a corporate development leader is that they're able to effectively run an end-to-end deal process. And what that means is not just the sourcing, but actually identifying if the company is actually interested in moving forward with an M&A discussion. That is not always a given and takes a little bit of muscle building to understand, are they ready? If they are ready, is it really the right fit for the company? If it is the right fit for the company, okay, great. Let's start framing up what it's worth to us and what kind of deal we might be able to get. And just moving that whole evaluation and process along in a way where you're, on the one hand, moving forward, but also asking the right questions along the way. An end-to-end deal process doesn't mean that every deal has to get done. An end-to-end process means that you looked at the deal in the right way. And if you did the deal, then you did it for the right reasons and you can fulfill the thesis. If you didn't do the deal, then you passed it up for the right reasons. For organizing and executing post-merger integration, this is a talent that the person doing corporate development should at least understand how it works. They don't need substantial experience actually doing the work, but they need to understand how it works. And they need to be able to work closely with either the chief people officer, your investors, or an outside consultant in running the post-merger integration process. And as an example, a really common mistake is just not starting it soon enough. You need to start at the minute you're signing a term sheet. And a lot of times it gets put off or not started at the right time, which has a lot of downstream effects. So you don't need to have someone who's expert, but they do need to know enough to know where to get the help and who needs to be the right partners in the room to make post-merger integration work. The other thing is having someone who is at least financially fluent, so you can build the deal models, lead preliminary and financial diligence. Like, you don't need to have somebody who's got like an MBA in finance, but they need to be able to understand how to be financially literate. They need to know how to go into a model, edit a model, read it, make updates, and to speak fluently about the model and what the model is saying. And so what I bring this up for is very frequently the hire is one of two things. The hire is either somebody who's a subject matter expert who really understands the industry, but doesn't have a lot of finance background and deal experience, and therefore they don't have exposure into the modeling and how you actually figure out something's worth and what it means to the company. Or you have someone who's extremely financially literate and very capable of doing the models, but they don't have the subject matter expertise. You kind of have to decide like which thing you want, because you might be able to make one or the other things up, but you do need to be able to kind of have the muscles right when you're thinking about the role. Otherwise, you run these risks of, like, for example, you're pricing a deal based off of gut. A lot of questions are being raised about whether or not that's the right deal to be doing. It can get really messy really fast. So these are some of the challenges you can run into if you don't do it right. So I've kind of walked you through a few considerations and worst case scenarios. Let's go back to kind of the fun part, which is, what should you expect from a corporate development leader in a SaaS company? The first thing that you have to have is a really strong relationship between the corporate development leader and the CEO. That's job number one. The CEO has to trust this person to make a lot of on-the-fly decisions and to know when to take the elevator and get input or help with a challenge that may be coming up with a particular opportunity or a component of the deal process. And it's also important because frequently the leadership team as a whole can become misaligned on different elements of the inorganic strategy. You have to have a really strong CEO partnership just to be able to make sure that you can iron out wrinkles that may come along the way during the course of. And so across the board, you want the corporate development leader to have great rapport and to work with all the leaders. But look, we're in a real world situation. If you have a leadership team of 6 to 8 people, invariably someone's going to have a different view of things. There's always going to be debates to be had, and you have to have that strong alignment with the CEO. The other thing, as I mentioned earlier, you need to expect that your corporate development leader will be market aware. There really is no excuse for not knowing that a deal is happening in market. There are very rare circumstances where that is an exception, but by and large, the leader should be deal aware and able to know when, able to find out what is happening in the market. And if there's something that might be interesting to your business, you need to be in a position to be able to at least look at it, if not action it. This plays into where that corporate development leader needs to get help in order to achieve that purpose. This may be a team of 1 or 1.5 or 2, but the company may have 300 employees, 500 employees, 1,000 employees. Every one of those people in the company are a part of the solution. They're a part of the listening system. And so you have to have a leader who can clearly articulate to the company the inorganic strategy and do it in the right way for that whole team. You know, you're not going to tell them every single thing, but you want to give them enough information so as they're out in the front line doing their work and getting information, they're a conduit of information for you. It's like having 1,000 listening devices at every corner in the market. Very specifically, in the last few years, I've had 2 deals that originated from frontline sales rep hearing something or a frontline customer success representative hearing a customer say something about a target we were interested in and carrying that information and causing us to be able to act very quickly to take an opportunity. In a couple of cases, it's actually resulted in a completed deal. So the listening system of the team and their visibility is really important. They also just get really excited about it, and it gives them another reason to believe in the company. The other responsibility of the executive is running an end-to-end deal sourcing process and post-merger integration. Post-merger integration can be a little bit of a heavy lift. And so frequently you have to get help from other places in the company. So being able to do that, what we call, authority through influence, being able to get other people to help you and feel like they're a part of something bigger when they are helping you, like that is a specific muscle and talent you want, because frequently the resources of corporate development in a SaaS company are borrowed resources. It goes without saying that you should expect a really close partnership with GTM and product. If you don't have a strong relationship with GTM and product, there's going to be a lot of system breakdowns. The GTM team is a confirmatory source of, can you sell this? Is the right product? What are your needs? And also sometimes battle testing what you see the needs are on the front lines with what the strategy may be. For the product side, it can be very similar. You have to have a product leader who really is bought into inorganic and the approach you're taking with inorganic. Otherwise, you're going to have a really hard time getting a deal through the cycle. The part-time job that frequently is given to corporate development executives in a SaaS company, especially where you're really trying to get the most out of all your resources, is to have them run ecosystem partnerships or really strategic partnerships. And that's a muscle that should just come with this role, but I wanted to highlight that's something that is a really fair expectation. And a lot of times partnerships are a way to test potential M&A opportunities before you actually action them. So these are all the things you should expect from a corporate development function inside of a SaaS company. This is kind of the must-haves. But how does that actually work functioning inside the business? I won't go into too much of a rabbit hole. What I'm showing here is a RACI model for a hypothetical SaaS company and the roles and responsibilities of the leadership team as compared to the corporate development leader. Now, I don't want everyone to look at this and say, wow, I don't agree with where you put that R, where that A is. The model has to be flexible for the company. And the talents and skills of the leadership team are going to vary from company to company. And so you need to have someone who's going to be willing to be flexible in terms of where the responsibility lies. I won't go into detail here. I'll just make a couple call outs. Number one is the setting of the strategy and leading the team is on the execution of the M&A strategy is incredibly important. And that's the close partnership with the corporate development leader and the CEO. In this model, I set it up that the corporate development is responsible for crafting the strategy and getting alignment with the leadership team on the strategy. And the CEO is accountable for helping orchestrate that buy-in with the leadership team. In this model, you can actually flip the R and the A. There are cases where the CEO is like, look, I know exactly the inorganic play I want to run. I want to have someone own it, maybe refine it a little bit, but ultimately go execute it. You can flip the R and the A around. It's really sort of the same outcome with the nuance in that, the corporate development leader doesn't necessarily have to have experience crafting a strategy from scratch if they've been more of a ball carrier. I think deal sourcing, it's super clear, like you have to own it. You need to work closely with the CFO on the deals you're looking at. And a lot of times the CFO and the product team are kind of the first spot on, is this thing going to pass muster? Can we pay for it? Does this actually fill a gap? There's a lot of consulting going across the organization. The two areas that I want to touch on is, this goes back to the comment I made earlier about the finance side of the role. So if you're like me and you're more of an SME with some finance capability, you might lean heavily on your CFO and their team for building out the models and doing the forecasting. You can also lean on investors to do that. I mean, your superpowers really need to be sourcing the pipeline, running the deal process, and really just kind of understanding the ecosystem. So if you're going to be flexible on the talents and capabilities around finance, this is a good place to do it, so long as the CFO and or the investors have the capability to fill in here. And so in this model, I left the CFO as responsible for financial diligence, with the corporate development function being accountable. And then for post-merger integration, very similarly to the CEO model, there's scenarios where the chief people officer has a ton of experience with integration and may have a plan and a team and resources to run a lot of it. And at that point, the corporate development function can be more of an accountable player versus a responsible. In this model, I made corporate development responsible because frequently they have a pretty large ownership of post-merger integration planning. They just have so much exposure to the target and so much context. It's something that you really want them to own. And frankly, this is something that you can outsource pretty easily and get some pretty good results. So if you don't have the resources in the building, you can do it. So as I said before, I didn't want to get exhaustive here. This is going to be posted on the web, and I'm happy to debate it in the comments on the podcast video, or you can reach out to me over LinkedIn if you have some comments about it. But I just say, you should have a real clear model in mind for what are the strengths of the team and what you want this role to be able to action. Where this lands is getting the corporate development role, the hire right the first time, is really important. And it would seem like some of these things are obvious, but they're not. These are things that actually go wrong very frequently. I'll give you a few examples that I've heard over the last year in speaking with founders, CEOs, investors, and those who I work closely with. These are the common hiring mistakes. Mistake number one is that you hire someone that's just really senior, meaning somebody who's a really well-known industry executive who's got all of the relationships, who can make any phone call and get anybody on the phone, but they're not willing to roll up the sleeves and do the work. And they lean on a lot of other people on the team to do a lot of the work, which means you don't really have a single owner. You just sort of have figurehead leadership. My view is that in a SaaS company and under 300 million in revenue, under 1,500 to 2,000 employees, this model doesn't work. You need somebody who's ultimately an owner who can roll up their sleeves. There's another common challenge that I've seen, especially in younger companies, where they distribute the corporate development leadership structure across a number of the leaders. So for example, the CEO does strategy. There's a business development guy who has the relationships. There's finance working on the finance stuff. The HR leader is working on post-merger integration. But if you go back and think through the jobs that are to be done, like those jobs all connect very tightly to one another. So in a distributed model, if you're trying to do multiple acquisitions, what you're risking by distributing the workload across the team is that there's no one single owner of pipeline. There's no one single owner of deal process. And in a SaaS company, what I think most of us have seen is the most successful companies have leadership who are 90% focused on a number, an outcome, a KPI, a metric. Anytime you distract that with something as complex as corporate development and M&A, it just erodes their ability to be really good at the other function. The other thing that I've seen frequently is hiring a walk-on player from within the company or someone who's really friendly with the CEO. It could be a co-founder who left and then came back. Like, one thing that I can articulate is in my previous experience, I was in the role where I was the fresh new guy in the room in the corporate development function on day one. It took me almost a year and a half to sort of learn all the things I needed to learn. Even then, I still, besides sort of just risking time and the uphill learning process, I left a lot of opportunities on the table. I made some judgment calls I would have done differently. And so just kind of making sure that the person you're bringing into the role really can deliver both not only on the relationships, but actually on the full execution of the jobs to be done. You can really risk a lot. And I think the one thing I point out here in terms of kind of the impact is if you don't run the M&A function well inside of the company, the board can get a little bit insecure about actually taking transactions over the finish line. It depends on your board's in a relationship with the CEO and how they kind of manage the company. Some are more hands-on, some are more hands-off. But if they are more involved, they're going to get a little bit more in the way of doing inorganic if they're not confident in the way you're running it. If they're more hands-off, you're just not going to have the right level of support, and it can be frustrating. So I think it's just really good to think through kind of who you want in the role. So, just kind of a few takeaways from this episode. I hope some of the thoughts were helpful is, number one, if you're a founder or CEO and you want to do inorganic, is it a one-time thing or is it going to be a multiple-time thing? If it's a one-time thing, that might be one kind of a person you're looking for, a borrowed resource from your investor or a consultant. If there's going to be a repeated thing, then really do an assessment of your leadership team, their strengths, how you want them to contribute into inorganic, and therefore the person that you're going to need leading the inorganic role. And then the second thing that usually is a miss is making sure you align with your leadership team. And by align, I mean not only in a room, but kind of one-on-one in terms of, I'm going to carry out inorganic. I know we've talked about it. This is the way I think what it's going to look like. This is the kind of leader I want to bring in. Are you bought in? You want to make sure that you have that support. If you don't have that support, there's a lot of really tough things that happen down the line that get in the way of actually being able to execute, including confusion about whether a particular target aligns with the strategy, lack of confidence in the valuation model for the target that you might be pursuing, or just in general, a particular leader not really being bought in and therefore not participating in the process, which can risk post-merger integration. Lots of things to consider. I hope for my listeners out there, this was super helpful, kind of a deep dive on the topic. I love having this. This is my passion. I love talking about it. So if you have some questions in follow-up, feel free to drop me a note on LinkedIn or put a comment anywhere the podcast is posted, and I'll gladly respond. With that, I'll thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Inorganic. If you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe. And until next time, thanks and take care.